Hi guys, so today we're going to be covering a couple of things in CSS. So looking at my VS Code, I already have a folder open, CSS. I'm going to create two files, index.html and index.css. So it can be any name, you can choose to call this main.css. Basically, we're going to be writing a very simple web structure using HTML, and we're going to be styling it using CSS. So let's go ahead and create a very basic web page. All right, so now that we have this simple structure, I'm going to put in my H1. We're also going to have H2. We're going to have a P. We're also going to bring in a very simple image. In here, we're going to bring in our profile image. So let's go ahead and grab one image. I'm very sure that this is wrong. All right, so let's go ahead and open up this page in our browser. All right, let's link the image. Now that is quite big, so let's go ahead and set a very basic height, 350. When working with CSS, you can actually have an external file doing your styling. You can have inline style, or you can also have internal style. So your internal style basically is we have a style right here inside the style tag, and we can decide to style, for example, the P tag. So basically these are called selectors. We're going to take this one after the other again, but I'm just trying to show you an example. So we can have color of blue. Let's save. Always remember to save. I'll be using the shortcut, so you can save using Control or Command S. I'm sure you can see that. This is how you write your internal CSS. You can write your inline CSS basically by adding the style tag here and putting in your color, right? And you can also have an external CSS file by writing your CSS outside the main file, and then calling your CSS file in the head. So yeah, this was wrong. Within the head, we can also call this with link, and we also have the style sheet here telling us that the link is actually calling a style sheet. Then we pass in the main.css file. So now let's save this. Let's come back here. Of course, so we have access to this file, but we don't have any code in here yet. So let's go to the CSS file and let's style our H1 with a color of red. Let's save this. Always remember to save. Let's refresh. Now you can see we have H1 styled in red. Let's go back to our page. Take this off for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some basic concepts first. I'm going to explain the box model. I will explain selectors. I will talk about the cascade. I will also talk about specificity, inheritance, color, sizing units. We'll talk about layouts, flexbox grid, logical properties. We'll talk about spacing. We'll also talk about pseudo elements and pseudo classes. We'll explain the concept behind borders. We'll also talk about shadows. There are so many other things we're going to be covering. We'll not be able to cover everything in a single class, so we'll have to cover most of them during our workshops. So if you're not part of the Discord server, join the Discord server so that you'll be able to get updates as we drop them on the server. Let's go ahead and understand the box model. So everything displayed in CSS is a box. We're going to explain that by giving a very simple example here. So we'll work with class. When you want to append a style into a particular element or tag, you use the class. You can also use the ID, and I will explain that shortly. So let's start off by using the class for this, and I'm going to call this a paragraph. Let's go ahead and style this in here. This is internal CSS. Now, when you're working with the class paragraph, you have to use the dot sign, which is a selector. This is a CSS selector, and this is how you select, this particular class. If you're working with ID, you have to select this form. Basically, I will explain this when we get to selectors, but this is just a quick brief. So then you have to reference with the ID. So we can have font size is equals 50px, and then we can refresh this. You see the size just increased. Now we're working with ID. That is why we have this selector. When working with class, we have to use the dots. This is still 50, of course. Let's make it 80. Save, refresh. The size became bigger. All right, so that is the basics of selectors. We're going to talk about that, in depth, and we'll talk about other things, related to that. But for a start, let's work with the internal style, so you can see the style as we also edit this file. And later on, we'll talk about, working with the external CSS file. All right. Now, I said everything in CSS is basically a box, and I'm going to explain that by working with the paragraph here, and I'm going to set the height of 100px, the width of 100px. These are CSS properties, and these are the values, right? So every style can have, every class can have a property and a value. So what I'm going to set here is a background color. I'm going to set this to yellow. I'm going to set a border color to black. Let's save this. Go back to the browser. Refresh. You can see this is what we have. The border did not show up, so let's try to fix that. Oh yeah, so the border did not show up because we have not added the type. So I think we should do solid 1px, and let's have black. So you see we have solid 1px black, and also set that to 10px. So there are a bunch of customizations you can do. This is something you have to learn and understand over time. You don't necessarily need to cram these stuffs. You just need to know that they exist when you see them. And most times you're going to be doing a lot of Googling, to figure these stuffs out. And with time, you get to remember most of them. So let's go back and take up the border. Now what we have here is a box, and I'm going to quickly explain what this is. So let's comment out these items. So we have only let's leave the paragraph, only the paragraph. So take this off. All right. If I save that file, Control S. Okay, so what I'm going to do is zoom into this so you can see it better. So now you can see we have this is my profile page, right within this box we just created, and we're going to talk about making you understand what we mean by this being a box, right? So basically, every single item would have margins, the border, padding, and also the content, which is the content, right? And we're going to explain that with a very simple example, and we'll drop a link. So follow the link, and you can also see. Let's do a quick Google search here. So let's search for border CSS box model. So just a simple image here. All right, so basically this is the box model. Every single item can have a margin, a border, padding, and contents. Now, in order to understand these various parts, let's work with our basic example here. So we're going to set those properties that we've seen right now. I'll go ahead and let's go back to the image. All right, so this is our image, the image of the box model. Let's go ahead and try to understand the margin, the border, the padding, and also the contents. Now, in order for us to understand these things, we'll have to try them, right? So basically, let's start by adding some padding in here. So we're going to have a padding of 50px. Let's save this, and let's check out to see what we have. So the padding is basically the space you have within the box, right? This is the box, remember, the height and the width. So we just added a bunch of space in here. So I would say the space that you have between, this is my profile page and the border. So we're going to explain this right here. Right, so we have this example. Now the padding is basically what you have in between from the text item to the border, right? That's what you have in between from the text item to the border. That is the padding. The margin is what you have from this item to the body of your, like to the extra content you have on your web page. So a quick example here is, let's assume that this right here is the border. I'm going to give this a width of 10 px. And this should be white. This is our web page. All right, so this is our text, and of course our text is sitting here in form of an object, right? So we have this object. The size or the space from the text to this border is called the padding, right? So you have the padding in between here. That is why if we go back here and let's reduce this a little bit. So this is what we have, and then we're able to set the padding of 50 px. In order to verify, I think maybe we can drop this a little bit to 20 px. All right. Now, when you right-click on your browser and you inspect the elements, so clicking on this item, I'm using Chrome, of course. When I hover on this item, you see the yellow part you see there is actually your padding, right? So that is your padding. And then the size you see outside, what you see outside of your padding is basically the margin between the item or the element, to the browser, right? So what we have right now, that is our margin, right? So we have the yellow part being the padding, the reddish parts on top being our margin, and then if we had set a border, so let's go ahead and set the border again. Let's refresh. Now the black you see right there is the border, right? So this is the padding, this is the border, and what you see outside of it is basically your margin. We don't have any margin set right now, but of course I was trying to describe that. So let's go ahead and set a margin of 30 px, and let's see what we have. So if we refresh this, when I hover again, you see that we had more space created, outside of this. So basically, you see we have the border, we have the padding, right? We have the content here. This is the content, right? We have the padding, we have the border, and we also have the margin outside. So that is basically what the box model tried to describe. Most items, most items or most elements, definitely when styled, right? When styled with your CSS, you can attach most of these properties, and that is how you create spacing, between items, right? You probably set, your borders, you probably set, a couple of other properties. So as we proceed, we'll try out a couple of examples, and it's quite simple. It's quite simple to, understand at a conceptual level, and you understand that the box model comprises of, your border, your margin, your padding, and yeah, basically that is it, and the content, right? So another example here, we have hello world. As you can see, we have the padding, this is the content, you have the padding, you have the border, and you also have the margin, sitting just right above the border itself. Okay, so yeah, so you can click on multiple examples here, and they basically describe the same thing. The content, the padding, the border, the margin, right? So you have each of them, bounded by different, layers. So let's take this down to 100% again. Let's come back here and let's try to do more styling. So for example, we're going to bring back this items that we have right here. Save that, refresh, so we have it. For the image, let's go ahead and add a class of image. Now it is possible to select some of the styles with the default tag name, right? So then you don't have to use the tag or the hash sign, whatever you call it. It's possible to call this item, or probably call it div, or probably call a p item. But of course, this is generic, right? In the sense that it references it acts as a reference to every single p item. So let's assume we have a paragraph, and we take off this class. Now we have another paragraph saying this is another paragraph. So it's very possible that you don't want this second paragraph to carry this style, but because you made it generic, every single item would look like that, right? And probably that is not what you want. So sometimes it's good to be specific with your style name. So let's go ahead and talk about styling other types of elements. Let's talk about inspecting your web page. Basically, this is what we got from the previous styling. As you can see, a couple of things changed because we adjusted the margin and the padding and all that. We're going to take off some of these things right now. Let's just stick to what we have. Also, yeah, I think this was the problem. Okay, so now this is what we have. We're going to add that padding once again. Let's use 20px, so we can have a reasonable amount of space around the content. So now that we have this, let's look at how to inspect this page right within the browser. All you have to do, right click on your browser, click on inspect. So this is what we call the developer tools or the dev tools. Now that you have the dev tools, there are a couple of things here that would need to explain to you, but let's kick off by understanding the elements, because within the elements you can see the structure of your page, from the head down to the body, and also the style we have in here. You can also get to inspect this style right at the style section here. So you see we have style, computed layout. For now, this is trying to show you details as regards the box margin, of course. So as you can see, we have the 20px, which is what we have here as the padding. You can see we have a border of 10px. You can also see we have a margin. All right, so we're not talking about that right now. Let's look at the style. When you select a particular element, it shows you the style by the right. So basically, you can turn off some of these items. You can also, just to see and probably edit or understand what you did. What you did, you can definitely play around with the content you have here. So if we go ahead and style some other items, we can also see those items in the properties. So let's try the image. We're going to have just the image element. So as you can see, we're not working with a class or an ID. We're just styling the image item, which means if we have multiple image items, this style will definitely affect them. Let's just say we have a border radius of 50%. So 50% is basically going to give me the circle shape, but of course you can have 10px, and we're going to talk about measurements shortly. For now, you see we have that border radius right here, 10px. Let's zoom in, right? Okay, so let's try 20 or 30 or 40px, right? You can just try these stuff out. You can have multiple images, giving you basically the same thing, right? So basically you can play around with these stuffs. Let's take this off. Let's try to adjust the height from CSS. So we can say we have a height of 300px, we have a width of 300px. Let's save, refresh. Now the size, as we have a less or a reduced size, 30px. So basically we're just playing around with this, and this is what we have. So if we select this item, which stands for, as you can see, inspect. So when you hover on this item, it's telling you can select an element in the page to inspect it. If this item is not selected, you cannot select an item here. You can also use this other option to see the responsive view of your web page in different with different screen sizes. We'll talk about this when we start working on responsiveness. For now, let's select this item, and you see the properties we assign to this item right on this side. So basically, this is how to inspect, your web page, inspect the elements on the page, and try to make some changes. So for now, we've not applied any H1 style, so it's giving us the default. But of course, you can override this. Let's try to edit this directly from here. So we can say 50px, right? For REM, so there are different measurement units that we'll talk about soon. 2EM and 10%. Let's try 50%. All right, so yeah. When working with CSS selectors, it is good to understand that we have various types of selectors. I'm going to take off some of the items we have on this page. Let's take off the second paragraph. Let's also take off the background, and the width and the height. Let's just leave it as is right now. I think we can still work with the image, of course. So let's save this and let's refresh. So this is very basic. Let's zoom in a bit. All right, so now that we have this, I'm going to show you different types of selectors. The first selector we have is known as the universal selector, where you apply basically you apply a style to everything, right? Everything. So to every single element you create. So we can decide to say we're going to set like padding of 20px. So if we go ahead and create multiple items and we save that, when we refresh, every single item has that padding, right? So every single item has a padding of 20px, and we can verify this by adding background colors. So let's see, let's try yellow again. Also put that here, refresh. So you see every single item has that padding of 20px, of course including the H1. So yeah, we will just work to the universal padding. The next type of selector we have is the type selector, which is what we've been using. This is called the type selector, right? So this is the universal selector. This is the type selector, and then we also have the class selector, which we'll just do this. So working with the class selector, this is where you have class. Without the class selector, you see it is going to be pretty big and basic, but having the class selector, and of course you can also style this using different different types. We also have the ID selector, and that is what I also explained the other time, where you use let's try it out on another example. ID, so I'm going to call this heading 1, and we'll say font weight. We should make this bolder. Let's make it 900, and yeah, I'm going to have ID heading 1. So if we save this, okay, probably we should try that for the size. It's already 900 for the weight, so let's do font size of 50px. All right, so let's see what we have. This is bigger, of course. Make it 150. So this is, of course, now this is outrageous. So yeah, but basically you get the point, right? So let's take this off. Let's use 1px. That's quite big. All right, so yeah, so these are the types of selectors we have. You can read up on this as well. We also have the attribute selector. We did not talk about this, but we have the attribute selector, where you are able to work with attributes, which of course uses the square brackets. And for example, we can work with data type. So let me show you an example, a very quick example on how to use the attribute selector. So you have the data type, and we're going to call the data type. Let's call this primary. Okay, and now we can just put, for example, font color. That's color. So let's use green. Okay, and we're going to have data type of primary, right? So primary. All right, so let's refresh this. So you see that is in green. That's not bold enough, so I'm going to change the font size to 50px so we can preview that very well. And here, let's just have fun. Font weights, let's use 900. Let's refresh. All right, so that is this is what you do when working with the attribute selector. Yeah, so I hope you understand that. There are a couple of other ways where you can also group, the selectors. You have multiple selectors, using the same style. Yeah, so for example, you can have P and H1 having background color of red. We'll save this. You see we have both P and H1, working with the same background color. We can also add, multiple types again, like A. So if we have like a very simple anchor, we have google.com, HTTPS. Let's also assume we have targets blank, and we have visit Google. Save this. If we refresh, we also have visit Google right here, with the same background color, showing that we're able to use, multiple, we're able to call multiple, we're able to group, different selectors, together. We can also add hello, right? So you can group stuff like this, okay? So as we progress, we would also talk about, working with pseudo elements and the rest of them. All right, so well, let's talk about Cascade. So basically, Cascade is the CSS algorithm used in selecting which item to work or to show for the element being styled. It's just an algorithm that is used for solving conflicts when you have multiple styles being applied to an HTML element. So let's start off by styling one element. We have image, right? And we're going to use this as an example. So we have the same item or the same style, affecting a single item. And we're trying to see which one would work. So we're going to set the border radius here, 50%. And we're also going to set another border radius here, radius of probably 10%. And yeah, so you see that when you apply this, you get the 10% applied because the Cascade algorithm looks through your style, be it the style file or the inline style, and it takes it from the top down to the bottom here. So it will definitely select the last item met. So we can also change the width down here to probably 700, and you discover that the last item was applied to the object, right? The last style was applied to the object. So let's also yeah, I think we have object fit for when we want to avoid a stretch like this. So you have, yeah, this is quite better. All right, so this is what you get when you use this. I think we can also set 30px to make the border even better. All right, so I think this is fine. And yeah, so the Cascade is just it's just a way, it's just something you need to understand around what item should be selected over the other, resolving conflicts across styles. Says specificity, it is quite important to understand that different patterns of applying styles to your elements have an algorithm for scoring. We call it a scoring algorithm basically, and it's a way to apply level of importance or level of preference that the CSS would use in setting a style for that specified element. And I'm going to explain this in a very basic way. We would also drop a link that you can use in probably going through and understanding, having a deeper understanding on what I would explain here. But it's quite simple in the sense that you tend to understand the type of selector that should be preferred or that should be used based on your context. So let's assume you have the P, and you also have paragraph. You also have paragraph 1, and yeah, let's also add the star here, and probably finally we would have let's take up some of the space so we can have enough. All right, so let's assume we also have yeah, paragraph 2 with important. So I'm going to explain that shortly. So we have different colors. This does not have important, and this is like cyan. We also have probably yellow, right? And we have blue. So finally we have a default color of black. All right, so when working with CSS, we can use these items and the idea behind specificity, which is basically kind of like a scoring system used in selecting which item would apply on a particular element. So we're trying to refer to a single element here, and I'm going to have a class of paragraph. I'm also going to have an ID of paragraph 1. So let's talk about this. So we have paragraph 1. All right, so now that we're working with just the P tag, let's take up the other tags for now. Let's refresh, and if you see what we have, you will discover that the ID works instead of the class, and that is basically because the ID has a higher specificity compared to the class. If we apply the class with important, which is paragraph 2 in here, you discover that the item with the important has a higher specificity. I think the class has about 10 points as well. The paragraph here has this should be about 100 points and not 1,000. And the important has yeah, I think the inline elements. Yeah, so I think the inline should have about 1,000. We'll share a link, and using the link you'll have to see more details about this. But basically it's just trying to understand the order of importance that the CSS cascading algorithm works with. So if you have the same elements working with multiple types of selector, it would select a particular item to work with, or a particular selector to work with based on the points allocated to these various type of selectors. So this is it's good you understand this, because sometimes you fall into having conflicts in your file where you come up with a style and you discover that that style is not being applied because a different style is probably overriding what you have. So it's quite important that you understand the different types of specificity and the one to work with while designing or while implementing a style for your elements. Covering color, sizing, layout. Probably would also touch on flexbox and grid, and so stay put, and the workshop will be shared with you very soon. We'll have a link where we'll have instructors take you on some of these topics. Do have a great time, and I'll see you in the Q&A session on Discord.